There's a moment in every silent war when one side stops pretending. One quiet rumor, one unverified sentence floating across the internet like smoke from a fire nobody can locate. And suddenly, an entire fan base, an entire camp, an entire carefully constructed empire begins twitching. That's exactly what happened this week. Not a song, not a single, not even a tweet from the man himself. Just a rumor, a whisper, a possibility. And the reaction it triggered told us everything we needed to know about who's truly winning this Cold War in hip-hop. Because when the mere mention of Kendrick Lamar's name causes grown men to flood comment sections, beg rival fanbases for streaming help, and lose their composure in real time, you're not watching confidence. You're watching survival mode dressed up as celebration. Let's set the scene properly, because the details matter. Drake just dropped what his camp is calling the Iceman era. 3 projects. A massive rollout. A flood of content engineered to dominate every algorithm, every playlist, every conversation. It was supposed to be the comeback moment. The reset. The grand statement that finally moved the needle past last year's beating. And for a brief second, it almost looked like the strategy was working. Streams were climbing. Headlines were posted. The machine was humming. And then a single rumor slipped into the timeline like an uninvited guest at a victory party. Kendrick Lamar is finishing a project. Kendrick Lamar might be dropping soon. That was it. That was the entire spark. And the gasoline it ignited was already sitting there, waiting. What unfolded next wasn't a debate. It wasn't a discussion. It was a meltdown disguised as confidence. Drake's most loyal soldiers, the ones who spent the last year insisting they had moved on, suddenly couldn't stop talking about the man they claimed didn't matter anymore. They flooded posts. They quote-tweeted strangers. They argued with anonymous accounts at 3 a.m. And in the most telling twist of all, some of them began publicly pleading with Nicki Minaj's fanbase, the Barbs, to come help stream Drake's records. Read that sentence again, slowly. A multi-billion stream global superstar's loyalists begging another artist's fanbase for help. That's not dominance. That's a distress signal wearing sunglasses. And here's where the story gets surgical, because the comedy on the surface is hiding something much heavier underneath. If the Iceman rollout was truly the cultural earthquake they claimed it to be, why would anyone need backup? Why would anyone need reinforcements? Why would anyone need to organize streaming parties like a desperate political campaign trying to flip a swing state? Real victories don't require a volunteer army. Real classics don't need a rescue mission. When a project actually connects, the streams come like rainfall, naturally, and without effort. The very act of begging for help is an admission that the rain isn't coming. And no amount of branding, marketing, or hashtag activism can manufacture the kind of organic momentum that real music creates on its own. Now, let's talk about Kendrick, because this is where the contrast becomes almost cinematic. While one camp is sprinting around the internet trying to manufacture a moment, the other side is doing something far more terrifying. Nothing. Silence. Stillness. The kind of stillness a predator has right before it moves. Kendrick hasn't tweeted about this beef in months. He hasn't done interviews about it. He hasn't released cryptic snippets or teased songs to bait engagement. He went on the biggest rap tour in modern history, performed the song that ended the war over and over again to roaring crowds, collected his trophies, and walked off the stage like a man who already knew the ending of the movie. That's not avoidance. That's authority. There's a massive difference between someone who has nothing to say and someone who simply doesn't need to say anything. And yet, the moment a rumor surfaces that he might be cooking something, the temperature in the room changes instantly.
Why?
Because everyone, even the people who pretend otherwise, understands the truth that's been sitting in plain sight. Kendrick Lamar didn't just win the last round. He redefined what winning even looks like. He turned a rap battle into a cultural event, a Super Bowl performance, a Grammy sweep, and a touring empire. He didn't just beat an opponent. He absorbed the entire conversation around that opponent and walked away with it. So when his name gets whispered again, it doesn't sound like a rumor. It sounds like a warning siren. Here's the part nobody on the opposing side wants to admit out loud. If Kendrick drops a project and doesn't say a single word about Drake, that might actually be more devastating than another diss. Think about it. Imagine an entire album, an entire era, an entire body of work that simply moves past the beef like it never existed. No rebuttal, no subliminals, no bars aimed sideways. Just pure art, pure storytelling, pure dominance. What does that say to the world? It says the war is over. It says the opponent has been filed away into the past. It says Kendrick has graduated to a different conversation entirely, while the other side is still trapped in the same room, redecorating the walls with 3 new albums of unanswered shots. Silence, when used correctly, is the loudest weapon in music. And that's exactly why the Iceman rollout has felt so emotionally charged underneath the surface. Strip away the production, the features, the marketing, and what's left? A man who keeps circling back to a fight that ended a long time ago. A man who can't seem to release a project without the ghost of his rival sitting in the booth with him. The whole rollout, no matter how it's framed, plays like a sequel to a movie that already had its ending. The villain lost. The credits rolled. And now someone is desperately trying to film a director's cut that reverses the result. But the audience already knows what happened. You can't unwatch the ending. Let's also address the strangest subplot in this entire saga, because it's too bizarre to ignore. There's a viral rumor floating around that Drake allegedly spent $365,000 at a French auction on a piece of used Michael Jackson memorabilia. Now, whether or not it's actually true, the fact that people instantly believed it tells you something. The man has built a public persona around collecting hip-hop and pop culture artifacts. Pharrell's chains. A counterfeit death row pendant. Michael Jackson's glove. Piece after piece after piece. At a certain point, it stops looking like fandom and starts looking like something deeper. A man trying to purchase relevance by surrounding himself with the relics of legends he can never become. You can buy the glove. You can't buy the moonwalk. You can buy the chain. You can't buy the catalog. You can buy the artifact. You can't buy the aura. And that's the psychological thread running through all of this. When you have unlimited money, unlimited access, unlimited fame, the human appetite doesn't shrink. It mutates. Basic desires get replaced by exotic ones. Normal ones get replaced by surreal ones. We've seen this pattern before with other megastars. The wardrobe gets stranger. The purchases get weirder. The behavior drifts further from anything recognizable. It's not because they're evil. It's because they've run out of frontiers. When the world has nothing left to offer you, you start chasing experiences and objects that don't even make sense to the average person. That's how a man ends up bidding on another man's undergarments in a foreign country. Boredom dressed up as legacy collecting. But let's pull the camera back to the bigger picture, because the Michael Jackson detail is just a symptom, not the disease. The real story is what's happening underneath the Iceman rollout. The forced energy. The constant need to reference the man who beat him. The shots fired sideways into the air, hoping one of them lands somewhere meaningful. There's a song allegedly aimed at someone named Janice, and the internet has been spinning in circles trying to figure out who Janice actually represents. Some say it's about Baby Keem's mother, which would be a bizarre and almost desperate angle to take. Others say it's about an executive at the label. Others claim it's a coded message to the media. Whatever the answer, the fact that we're even having this conversation proves the point. The rollout isn't generating curiosity about music. It's generating forensic investigations into hidden grievances. That's not how victorious albums function. That's how grief functions when it's been wrapped in 808s. Meanwhile, the people who actually understand the chess being played here are saying the quiet part out loud. Industry voices, the ones who've watched these games unfold for decades, are openly admitting that Kendrick Lamar is too calculated, too cerebral, too patient to lose his composure over any of this. He's not in his room punching walls. He's not refreshing Twitter at midnight. He's not pacing the studio in a panic. He's doing what champions do between rounds. He's resting. He's watching. He's calculating. And when he moves, he won't move loudly. He'll move surgically. Because that's what separates the truly great from the merely popular. The great ones understand that timing is more powerful than volume. And here's a detail that should make every observer pause. There are reports, whispers, hints from people inside Kendrick's circle that he treats the studio like a full-time job. 9 to 5, day in, day out. Not because he's chasing trends, not because he's racing anybody, but because that's just how he operates. The myth that he can only release a project every few years is exactly that. A myth. He could drop tomorrow. He could drop next month. He could drop on Juneteenth and turn an entire holiday into a cultural event. The reason he doesn't flood the market isn't because he can't. It's because he refuses to. There's a difference between a chef who can't cook fast and a chef who refuses to serve anything that isn't perfect. One is a limitation. The other is a philosophy. And philosophy always wins in the long run. Compare that to the playlist-style rollouts we've been getting lately, where quantity is mistaken for quality and length is mistaken for legacy. Dropping 3 projects at once might dominate a weekend, but it rarely dominates a decade. The albums people return to 10 years later are the ones that were crafted with surgical precision, not the ones assembled like fast food combo meals. There's a reason certain projects keep generating streams years after release. There's a reason certain albums still get debated, still get analyzed, still get referenced in cultural conversations. It's not because they were the loudest at launch. It's because they were the deepest at construction. Volume fades. Vision lasts. And this is where the delusion of the opposing camp becomes almost comedic. Some of them are now insisting that the recent rollout is the album of the year. The album of the year. In a year that hasn't even finished yet. Before Kendrick has even moved a finger. Before any of the other major artists have made their final statements. That kind of premature coronation isn't confidence. It's anxiety. People who are truly winning don't need to declare victory every 6 hours. They let the receipts speak. They let the numbers settle. They let history catch up. The very urgency to label something a classic on day one is usually proof that the speaker is afraid the label won't stick if they wait too long. There's also a fascinating subplot involving the people who keep claiming Drake is now a free agent, independent, and signed, liberated from his label. Where this information actually came from, nobody can say. It just appeared. It got repeated. It became gospel through repetition rather than verification. But when actual outlets reached out to the label, the response was simple. He's still signed. So, who started the rumor? And why? Because narratives like that don't just appear. They get planted, watered, and harvested. Someone wanted that story in the air. Someone wanted the public to believe that the man behind these recent releases is some scrappy underdog fighting the industry alone. The truth is far less romantic. No artist drops 3 back-to-back projects with that level of marketing muscle without a major machine behind them. That's not independence. That's optics. And speaking of optics, let's talk about the discovery sections of every major streaming platform. The hip-hop section, the R&B section, the hits section. Same face, same era, same rollout, plastered across every entry point of the algorithm. If that's not label support, then the word has lost all meaning. True independent artists don't get that kind of placement. They fight for every pixel of visibility. They beg for playlist spots. They scrape together promotion through grassroots channels. What we're watching is the opposite. It's a fully funded, fully orchestrated, fully institutional rollout being marketed as a lone wolf rebellion. The disconnect between the story and the reality is so wide you could drive a tour bus through it. Now imagine, just for a moment, what happens if Kendrick actually does drop. Not necessarily a diss. Not necessarily a response. Just a project. A real one. The kind of project he's known for. A conceptual masterpiece, layered with meaning, threaded with storytelling, drenched in detail. Something in the lineage of his previous body of work. What happens to the current conversation? It evaporates. Overnight. The Iceman era, no matter how it's marketed, no matter how many features it has, no matter how much streaming engineering goes into it, gets compared to a Kendrick album. And we've seen that comparison play out before. It doesn't end well for anyone standing across from him. The man doesn't just release albums. He releases benchmarks. And benchmarks change the standard by which every other release gets measured. That's the real reason the opposing camp is so jumpy right now. They know it's coming. They've seen this movie. They watched it last year. They watched a man treat a battle like a clinic, drop record after record, calibrate each blow with surgical precision, and walk away with a Super Bowl halftime show and a stadium tour as his reward. The trauma of that experience is still fresh. It's still in the bloodstream. So when a rumor surfaces that the same man might be cooking again, the panic isn't irrational. It's earned. It's the panic of people who already lost once and know, deep down, that they cannot survive a second beating of that magnitude. And let's be honest about something else. If Kendrick did decide to respond again, the ammunition available to him this time would be even more devastating than the last round. There are unresolved storylines. There are public lawsuits floating around. There are perception problems that have only gotten worse over the last year. There are angles upon angles upon angles, and he wouldn't even need to touch the heaviest ones. He could win on pure rapping alone. He could win on craft. He could win on narrative. He could win on tone. He could win on the simple, devastating fact that he's a better technical writer with a deeper bag. And that's before he even gets to anything personal. The man wouldn't need to swing hard. He'd just need to swing accurately. And accuracy from a sniper is far deadlier than power from a brawler. Yet somehow, despite all of this, the opposing camp keeps performing confidence like it's a job requirement. They keep saying their side is the GOAT. They keep declaring victory in a war they're still actively fighting. They keep insisting the other man is washed, irrelevant, finished. And then, in the same breath, they organize streaming campaigns and beg rival fanbases for help. The contradiction is so loud it's almost deafening. You don't get to call someone irrelevant while simultaneously needing reinforcements to outpace their shadow. You don't get to declare the war over while still firing shots into the trees. The behavior tells a story that the words refuse to admit. And then there's the comedy gold of watching commentators twist themselves into shapes trying to defend the indefensible. Certain media voices have built entire personalities around pretending one side invented techniques that have existed in hip-hop for decades. Concept rollouts, character-driven albums, multi-project arcs, visual storytelling tied to music. None of this is new. None of this is groundbreaking. Artists have been doing variations of this for years, including the very man being positioned as the villain in this current narrative. Pretending otherwise isn't analysis. It's marketing dressed in academic clothing. And the audience can feel the dishonesty even when they can't articulate it. Here's what nobody on that side wants to confront. Honesty is a superpower in a world drowning in performance. If you actually liked the recent project, just say so without inflating it into something it isn't. If you actually thought a certain bar landed, just say so without pretending it ended a career. The moment you start exaggerating, the audience stops trusting you. And once trust is gone, your platform is just noise. There are voices in this culture who have lost all credibility because they refuse to call anything what it actually is. Everything is either the greatest of all time or the worst thing ever made. Nothing exists in between. That isn't commentary. That's theater. And theater eventually loses its audience when reality keeps contradicting the script. Meanwhile, Kendrick's camp doesn't need theater. They have receipts. A stadium tour that broke records. A halftime performance that became a cultural touchstone. A song that turned into a generational anthem. Grammy wins stacked like trophies on a mantle. A whole moment in time where an entire genre stopped and turned its head in his direction. That's not narrative. That's history. And history is the one thing you cannot edit in post-production. You can spin the story while it's happening. You can rewrite the headlines after the fact. But the receipts stay. The footage stays. The numbers stay. And every time someone tries to flip the narrative, the receipts whisper back, no, that's not what happened.
So, what comes next?
Nobody knows for sure, and that uncertainty is exactly what makes this moment so electric. Maybe Kendrick drops next month. Maybe he drops next year. Maybe he drops on a random Tuesday with no warning, no rollout, no marketing campaign, just a link and a moment. Whatever the timing, one thing is certain. Whenever he does release, the entire conversation will rotate around him again. The Iceman era will be measured against it. The recent projects will be compared to it. The whole landscape will shift because that's what happens when a true cultural force moves. Everyone else has to react. Everyone else has to recalibrate. Everyone else becomes the supporting cast in a story that isn't theirs. And here's the final, unspoken truth that hovers over all of this like a storm cloud nobody wants to acknowledge. The reason the opposing camp keeps connecting Kendrick to every single rollout, every single release, every single conversation, is because they've quietly accepted that they need him to stay relevant. The villain has become the gravitational center. Without him in the conversation feels smaller. Without him as the reference point, the achievements feel less impressive. They need the comparison to give their wins meaning. He doesn't need them at all. That asymmetry is the entire story. One side built a career that exists on its own terms. The other side keeps measuring itself against a man who barely acknowledges its existence. That's the dynamic of a true checkmate. Not when the king falls, but when the king realizes he's been playing a game the other side already finished. The pieces are still on the board. The moves are still being made. But the outcome was decided rounds ago, and everyone except one player can see it. Every additional move just confirms what's already true. Every new project just adds another layer to the loss. Every desperate streaming campaign just underlines the desperation. And every rumor of a Kendrick release just reminds everyone who the actual sun is in this solar system. So when you see the meltdowns, the panic posts, the begging for help, the forced declarations of victory, understand what you're actually witnessing. You're not watching confidence. You're watching the psychology of people who know, deep in their chest, that the other shoe hasn't dropped yet. They feel it coming. They sense it in the air. They hear it in the silence. And every day that passes without a Kendrick release is another day of waiting for thunder they cannot stop. That kind of waiting breaks people. It frays them. It exposes them. And we're watching that exposure happen in real time across every comment section, every quote tweet, every desperate group chat trying to organize the next stream push. The lesson buried inside all of this is bigger than rap. It's about how power actually works in any arena. Loud confidence is usually fragile. Quiet confidence is usually lethal. The person screaming about their victory is rarely the person who actually won. The person sitting silently in their workshop, sharpening tools nobody else can see, is the one you should worry about. Hip-hop has always been a mirror for these dynamics, and right now, the mirror is showing us something unmistakable. One side is performing. The other side is preparing. One side is begging for streams. The other side is being begged to drop. One side is selling artifacts of legends they can never become. The other side is becoming the legend whose artifacts will be sold one day. And as the rumor of a new Kendrick project continues to ripple through the timeline, the only honest question left is this. What happens when the man who already won decides to win again? Not because he has to. Not because he was provoked. Not because anyone forced his hand. But simply because the timing is right and the vision is ready. That's the version of Kendrick that should scare everyone across the aisle. The one who isn't motivated by revenge, but by craft. Because revenge eventually burns out. Craft never does. Craft just keeps building, keeps refining, keeps elevating, until the gap between the king and the pretenders becomes a canyon nobody can cross. So pay attention to the silence. Pay attention to the patience. Pay attention to the way one side keeps shouting while the other side keeps building. Because when this story finally completes its arc and history writes the final chapter of this era, the loudest voices in the room won't be the ones quoted. The quietest one will. The man who said the least will end up saying the most, simply by doing what he's always done. Creating, crafting, conquering, without permission, without panic, without performance. And when that moment arrives, every meme, every cope, every streaming campaign, every begged favor from rival fanbases will collapse under the weight of what was always true. The throne was never up for debate. The crown was never on loan. The king just stepped away to write the next chapter. And the next chapter is going to read like an earthquake the empire couldn't see coming until the ground was already cracking beneath their feet. That's the story. That's the truth nobody wants to spell out. And whether the rumor turns out to be true tomorrow, next month, or next year, the reaction has already told us everything. The whisper alone shook the empire. Imagine what the actual record will do.